Welcome back to Sustainapod, a youth-led podcast for young people and anyone passionate about issues related to sustainability. This episode is part 2 of our conversation with Stephanie and Deeya from Body Banter. Last time, we spoke all about the origins of body banter and the topic of eating disorders and mental health. We continue this conversation in this episode by focusing more onto the nuances of body image issues.
Right. Okay. So I guess picking back up where we left off, the second part of the question was about the ways in which body image struggles and disordered eating can vary between different genders and different cultural backgrounds. So from your work, I guess mainly in Hong Kong, but also in different countries, like as you said in the US, like how have you seen this manifest, I guess?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, excited to jump into this part of the question. I think I'll take a look into the differences between genders first and talk a little bit about that. And, as we were discussing earlier, there is a misconception that eating disorders predominantly affect women. I think this is something that is, it's a very widespread misconception, and something to notice about this idea is that when we think about the role of gender in eating disorders, and it is true that a lot of times marketing will target women, and this is true. Like a lot of times the explicit manifestations of eating disorders as we know it can happen in the female population. And a lot of this is also biased because of the research that is done on this topic. And a lot of times the research will focus on female experiences. And so that's one way in which this can become can shape that misconception, just the way that the research is predominantly focused on this population. And also when we start to look at some of the societal or kind of the ways that, I guess gender norms can affect the ways that people express their concerns, or the ways that these symptoms of eating disorders or disordered eating or body image struggles can manifest in people of different genders. So just for example, if we're looking at eating disorders and body image struggles in men, we know that a lot of times because of norms of toxic masculinity, men are less likely to express that they're going through something difficult. So first of all, it just may not be that they're not struggling. It is most likely and more likely that they just don't feel comfortable sharing that they might be experiencing something like this. And another reason why this might be or eating disorders and body image struggles might be underdiagnosed in men is because these struggles may manifest differently. So as in terms of symptom wise. So for example, we know that with body image ideals, a lot of times with women, the body image ideal is leaning towards more of the thinner ideal. And this is where, the weight loss will be more of a symptom or a more prominent symptom in eating disorders that manifest in women. And on the flip side, with men, a lot of the body image ideals will emphasize muscularity. And so in that sense, a lot of times the emphasis, we just might miss those symptoms in men because we think that, oh, this person is just going to the gym or they're just putting on muscle. They look really normal, quote unquote. So that's another reason why we may miss it in people of different genders. And then looking into the literature that exists on the LGBTQIA plus population, there's also, I would say that this field is still developing and there is still a lot of research to be done. But what we do see is that because individuals in this population may feel very out of place in the bodies that, or in the sex that they were assigned at birth, they don't feel very comfortable in this, in their bodies. They don't feel like they can fit or adhere to societal standards. This can mean that they feel very alienated in their bodies and want to escape that experience. And I would definitely say that I'm not an expert in this field and would just like to bring attention to the fact that there are these nuances between body image and eating experiences in people of different genders. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in just understanding how body image struggles and eating disorders can manifest in people of different genders. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit also on people of different age groups. And, I know that also there is a prominent, there just is a greater prevalence of eating disorders in younger or kind of people in the adolescent age group, but that doesn't mean that they don't affect people in older age groups. And as an example, for women, there is another period of body image insecurity that can happen when, for example, you're going through pregnancy. And this is a period of time, and in menopause, a period of time where the body is going through significant amounts of change. And so there is a possibility for body image struggles to occur across the age spectrum. And those are just two examples that I can think of. But this is just to say that there are definitely pockets of time where people can be more susceptible. There are populations of people that are more susceptible in some circumstances. And there is also a possibility for eating disorders to manifest in people of different populations and different life stages. So that's kind of how I look at how eating disorders and body image struggles can manifest. And then culturally, I know that we did kind of already speak about how individuals in the Hong Kong context, will experience body image struggles because of, the various factors like the fast-paced society, and also, the ways that our cultural practices sometimes mean that food and body are topics of conversation that in not very supportive ways sometimes. But I think that a main way that culture can affect the ways that body image struggles and eating disorders can manifest is really just, I like to draw back to the biopsychosocial model here. And if people have studied psychology, you'll be very familiar with this. Just the idea that mental health problems and, including eating disorders are always, a product of biological and psychological and social factors. So that means that perhaps if someone has a biological predisposition to be more anxious, for example, in the face of stressors, psychological predisposition to be more perfectionistic in the ways that they do things, and then social stressors of, let's say, cultural influences of people commenting on their bodies all the time, academic stressors all coming together at the same time, that will increase their risk of developing a mental health problem or an eating disorder in this case. So when I think about just the ways that cultural influences can shape the eating disorder experience, it's really just to say that the cultural influences are one part of the kind of the diagram of the three different circles of the biopsychosocial model. And sometimes it happens to be the case that someone will experience those social or kind of those sociocultural stressors as particularly salient that can trigger something within them. And then that will shape their experience of how they succumb or how they experience the body image or eating disorder. So kind of a longer way to look at that.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, regarding like body image struggles and how that varies across different genders, I got like a flashback to this sort of conversation about men's mental health that I helped record. And so basically that whole discussion was just consisted of multiple insightful moments where I learned a lot about the different struggles men face compared to women, and how women tend to receive more support, but not only support, just very emotional support, and how that makes men less likely to open up. And again, going back to the idea of toxic masculinity, because they might have this expectation of men not being welcomed as being vulnerable, like that idea of men not being able to be vulnerable with each other or to anyone around them, especially when it regards their mental health or body image issues. And so something that really stuck with me, something that was mentioned in that conversation, was the idea of ego lifting. So in gyms, it's sort of when you're competing with each other, and that sort of defeats the purpose of personal development, which is ideally what a gym is for, because anything you do in life should be for you. Like, you should do things for yourself and not anyone else. And so this idea of ego lifting sort of contradicts that purpose. And another thing that was mentioned, that really stuck with me, is just the idea of men being able to access professional help. So something that was mentioned about like counseling, like this person's reason for going to get counseling was that they came across a quote, and it said something along the lines of, if you think it might help you, then you should go for it. And that's the reason that sort of pushed them to access this type of professional help. And it really benefited them. So I think in terms of how we treat like body image issues when it comes to men and women, we should sort of be mindful about people do have different experiences, but at the end of the day, we're all struggling, and it's better to be accepting and welcoming so that you can overcome something together rather than segregating everyone in this sort of bubble, which only harms the purpose of advocating for such issues.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like with men, especially, I think it's kind of obvious even from this call, like most of the people working in, obviously like mental health or like, counseling, psychology, a lot of those fields are often very woman dominated. But I think we definitely need to include more like research, more perspectives based on the men's experience as well. Because like, although like obviously there's recently been a lot of talk about like getting women involved in society, like making sure they have equal rights as men. But at the same time, we also need to realize that perhaps like men or those, like we need to include to make sure that they are heard as well, and that like they definitely are going along the struggles of us, and that they definitely should not be like diminished as less worthy than any of the perspectives than us. And like definitely about what when Stephanie was talking about like the different factors that contribute to eating disorders, like honestly I related to it so much, because many of it were the reasons like myself was kind of suffered from it, like especially since like it's like the worst part is when you're trying so hard to make sure your own body image is good, but then someone says an off comment that perhaps they didn't really mean to intend to. Oh my god, like, I feel so fat today, I shouldn't have eaten this. And you kind of like start feeling, I should have like, aren't they right, like I shouldn't have done that. It's just a lot of energy trying to fend off all these images and also these quotes and words about body image itself and trying to make yourself feel better about it. So yeah, I guess this leads on to the next question. Sorry for the very long-winded monologue, but what do you think needs to be changed in society as a whole with regards to, mental health and body image? This can apply to both Deeya, Stephanie, even Belinda, if you want to, please pitch in with your thoughts.
Just breaking the stigma. Honestly, it's like the biggest thing we could possibly do. But also, if we want to change something in society, these actions sort of start from the individual. And so, because if you're advocating for an issue, you must ensure that your individual actions align with what you're speaking up for. And once you have this down, then you've basically mastered the base of sort of changing society. And this also links to like advocacy. Because once you're in line with what you are speaking up for, people are now more willing to listen and change because they know and they can see in front of them like an example of this working. And generally just educate like your friends, your family friends, your friends' family. But you must ensure that you as an advocate are actively performing. And just ensuring people that every body is a beautiful body, every person is a beautiful person, every personality is a beautiful personality. Like people are so diverse, and accepting people for who they are, it's going to foster like a big shift in what society thinks about whatever expectations they have about anyone or anything.
I absolutely resonate with everything you said, Deeya. And I think that you're right. It all happens from the individual first. You have to make sure that you can stand up for what you're saying and work toward, for example, I always say, in terms of lived experience advocacy. So speaking up about your own story, always, never share a wound that is still hurting you, because a lot of times there will be the tendency to want to talk about every single aspect of the experience, especially on a recovery journey. And this is true. It can feel very empowering to share something you're currently processing. But I do think that it's something that I learned, along the journey, that when you share something that you're still processing and is actually still quite raw, that's not only just harmful to yourself, but it can also be quite harmful to the other person to kind of have this I always think about like a half-baked cake. It's like, still has runny eggs in it. Might give someone salmonella. So I just think, when it comes to creating change about an issue, definitely processing it yourself, giving yourself the time to heal so that when you do advocate and speak up for these issues, you have, a very stable base to stand on, and you give off that sense to other person that there's a possibility of getting to this place, and being in the stance it's a strong one. And when you share that story, you're creating that network of possibility, just understanding that you can get to a place that is strong and stable, and the narratives you share are empowering. So that's what I think about when I think about creating sustainable change.
Well, you mentioned empowering narratives. That in itself was an empowering narrative, both Deeya and Stephanie. So honestly, just living for this such a focus on, self-love and really making a change to everyone around you. And so all I really have to add is that we talked a lot about how comments matter, and as much as like an offhand comment can like really affect your own body image and perpetuate certain harmful eating patterns, they can also do a lot of good for someone that might be going through something. And if you say something that really changes the way they see themselves, or like, that is already impact in, it seems very small, like an individual thing, but it can also really do a lot in terms of just fostering more discussions about this. Like having having discussions with like your male friends, relatives, everyone, just bringing in everyone of all different ages, being inclusive. I think that's also really important. So last few questions for today. One is more specific to this topic, and then the final one is one we asked like all our guests. So the one for this topic is both Stephanie and Deeya. What do you think is a healthy body?
Wow, I love this question. I'm gonna jump in, and then Deeya, please also jump in as you see fit. But I think something I've been thinking about recently about what a healthy body means is definitely I've been very influenced by the holistic approach to understanding health. And Deeya is giving me the sparkly, there's an emoji with like star eyes, and that's what I'm seeing right now. And yes, I think in terms of the holistic approach has had a big influence on my own recovery and just like defining what health means today, because I think that ultimately a healthy body also needs to feel really, it doesn't just come from, in terms of physical health, those objective markers, which are important, things that we eat and the ways that we move, those are undoubtedly things that contribute to our physical well-being. And, it's not to say that those things aren't important, but I think that when it comes to feeling good in our bodies, also, it also includes other aspects of the experience that we, the ways that we go through life, whether we enjoy the experience of eating, who we surround ourselves with as we're eating, the meaning, the meaning we create surrounding meal times. I think cultural traditions surrounding eating, obviously we were talking about familial gatherings earlier and how those can be sometimes very difficult to be in. But at the same time, I'm just thinking back to Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year recently, and thinking about how being in that space of bonding and having that experience of being present in the body and sharing food in that space is something that contributes to a holistic approach to health. So that spiritual aspect of a healthy body as well. Yeah, psychological, spiritual, emotional, social, physical aspects of a healthy body. I think all of those things really matter. So passing the baton along to Deeya.
I agree. Like, I couldn't have agreed more. I think in terms of just the different aspects of health, because when we think of like a healthy body, ideally your mind would straight away go to physical health or like sports, like fitness and all of that. But a healthy body is so much more than that. There's your emotional health, your mental health, and what Steph said, like spiritual health, social health, like all of these different branches contribute to who you are as a person. And if you are satisfied with these different aspects, you automatically are a healthy body because you are satisfied with your life. But also because of this, everyone sort of has different standards in terms of what works for them and what classifies as good emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, social health. And because of that, because of this sort of subjectivity, in my mind, a healthy body is undefined because there are so many different interpretations. And linking this to what Steph said, as long as you feel good, then you are a healthy body.
It's brilliant. That was very, very insightful. I think just kind of building onto that, the idea of a body is really just a vessel to do all the other things that you want to do. So I think what you're touching on as well is this idea of a healthy being as well, like the spiritual side and all of that, which is all really, really important as well. So just to wrap up on this podcast, which was an amazing conversation, do you have any advice for youth out there who are going through something personal and then want to share their stories or launch their own initiatives? Like any words of advice for our young listeners out there?
Ooh, what a great wrap-up question for this episode. I love that. Thank you, Belinda. And I think the first thing that I would say to this is just always revisiting why you're here, and just remembering that ultimately at the end of the day, what is sustainable and what will bring your passion to the world is remembering why you came to this mission in the first place. I'm going to butcher this statement because it's not the full sentence is not coming nicely to my brain, but it's something along the lines of like, the world doesn't need another person who's doing what they should be doing. They need someone who believes in what they're doing, or something like that. But essentially what it's trying to say is that there's plenty of shoulds and expectations as to what we do need in this world. There's always this like, oh, this would make the world so much more of a better place if more people did this. But then thinking about also the need for people who are passionate about what they do. And when everyone does what they're passionate about and what they believe in, then that's what makes the world filled with that energy. And Deeya's giving me also this like, face. And I definitely have come back to that statement over and over in my life, because there are always an endless amount of things that we can do, or we think that there are so many injustices and problems in the world that ultimately need to be addressed at some point. But if we stretch ourselves too thin and try to tackle everything, then nothing ever gets done ultimately. So I think that a lot of times, like, we need to also think about our own well-being as advocates, give ourselves that space to grow, and give ourselves grace when we can't tackle everything, and then put energy into things that mean a lot to us, and connect with a community that are able, communities that are able to help us in certain ways, expand our worldviews, and that makes the efforts more sustainable, because then everyone's working together collaboratively to create a better world.
Yep, thank you so much for both of you for sharing all of your insights. And thank you to Sustainable listeners for tuning in this week with us. We would love to hear from you about the episode. So please let us know your questions and comments by messaging our Instagram at sustainablepod@GIH or email us at sustainablepod@gmail.com. Thank you.